What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. Today, we are going to be finishing our updated ranking series. I am going to be talking about the tight end positions. So if you haven't watched the other positions, quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers, I strongly suggest you go watch those at the end of this video. But today, we are going to be tackling the top 15 tight ends in Dynasty Fantasy Football, including the 2024 rookie class. So with that being said, let's not waste any more time and let's hop right into today's video and let's start talking about my first tier. Now, as you guys can see, I have the tier maker pulled up here on the screen for you. We are going to work our way from the F tier at tight end 15 all the way up to the S tier to my tight end 1. So we are going to be going in reverse order today. And that is going to bring us to the tight end 15 in my rankings. And that is going to be Michael Mayer of the Las Vegas Raiders. Michael Mayer was a second-round pick in the 2023 draft, and he finished the 2023 season with 27 receptions for 300 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, at just 22 years old going into his 23-year-old season, this is a guy who really didn't get a lot of playing time early on during his first year. It was really about week 6 when Michael Mayer was finally established as the starting tight end for this Raiders team. And from week 6 to week 15, he had 3 top 10 finishes at the position. Now, as a rookie, Michael Mayer was a top 10 player amongst all tight ends in yards per reception and target separation. So this was a guy who, when he got the football, he did a lot with it in his hands, and he was getting open quite often. Now, obviously, the quarterback play wasn't great last year, and I don't know if it's going to be great this year either. We do know that they have Gardner Minshew coming in as a free agent. Maybe he's the week 1 starter, maybe not. But I am expecting Michael Mayer to take a step forward here in year 2 of his career, and he is coming in here at my tight end 15. Now, coming in at my tight end 14, staying here in this F tier, it is going to be Pat Freiermuth of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Pat Freiermuth, he dealt with some injuries during the 2023 season. It did force him to miss some time, so he didn't get a full year under his belt here in 2023. But when you look at what he was able to put together statistically, this is a guy who had 32 receptions for 308 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, Pat Freiermuth has been a low-end tight end 1 the previous 2 seasons here in Pittsburgh. This is also a team that traded away Deontay Johnson to the Carolina Panthers, so it is going to open up some opportunities here for Pat to get some more targets, hopefully here in year 4. And we also assume that he got a quarterback upgrade here this year, whether you think it's going to be Russell Wilson or whether you think it's going to be Justin Fields. I think we all expect that either of those guys will be an upgrade to what Kenny Pickett was during the 2023 season. And overall, I still think that Pat Freiermuth has that low-end tight end 1 potential, but just a guy that is coming in right now as my tight end 14. Now, moving on to my D tier, I am going to have as the tight end 13, Cole Kmet of the Chicago Bears. And Cole Kmet, he's 25 years old right now. He did take a step forward again during the 2023 season for our Dynasty Fantasy Football teams and for his NFL production as well. His fantasy points per game numbers have gone up every single year that he has been in the NFL. So those are obviously positive types of things that we want to see out of Cole Kmet. And in 2023, he had 73 receptions for 719 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns as well. Now, Cole did get some added competition here in this receiving room. They obviously traded for Keenan Allen there in Chicago, so there is going to be some extra mouths to feed, and it probably is going to cap Cole Kmet's upside. But this is also a guy who saw the 5th most red zone targets of all tight ends in 2023. So when it's time for Chicago to score points, they are scheming Cole Kmet open in those opportunities. He's received a 4-year extension to stay in Chicago, and he is going to be receiving a quarterback upgrade in Caleb Williams. I think all of those things are good things for Cole Kmet, but again, the upside is going to be capped, so that's just why he's going to be coming in as my tight end 13. Now, coming in at my tight end 12, that is where I have Evan Engram of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And Evan Engram, a little bit older than some of the guys that we've talked about. He's 29 years old going into his 30-year-old season. But Evan Engram, he saw a whopping 143 targets during the 2023 season. That was more targets than wide receivers like Chris Olave, Mike Evans, and DJ Moore. And what he was able to do with those targets was a great season in general. He had 114 receptions, 963 receiving yards, and 4 touchdowns. I think Evan Engram is the perfect, affordable, contending type of tight end that you're adding to your roster. And that's probably because the price is going to be pushed down, one, due to the age, like I said, 30 years old, not necessarily young for fantasy football standards. And also because a lot of the young and exciting tight ends saw good situation changes this offseason, so they're going to be pushed up draft boards as well. Now, obviously, we know that Calvin Ridley left in free agency. They did replace him with Gabe Davis. They may not be done. They could be adding a day 2 type of wide receiver in this NFL draft. And I would bet that Evan Engram is due for another top 10 season at the tight end position. The only question long term is how much longer will he be able to do that with his age getting a little bit up there. Now moving on to my C tier, here's where I'm going to have my tight end 11, and that is going to be Jake Ferguson for the Dallas Cowboys. And Jake Ferguson, 25 years old, so he is still young. And in 2023, being the first year that he was the full-time starter, he did finish as the tight end 9 on the year. He was able to put together a stat sheet of 71 receptions for 761 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns, and he was the number 1 overall ranked tight end in terms of red zone targets. He had 25 of them. So he was Dak Prescott's number 1 receiving option anytime they got within that red zone there, and it was very clearly seen. And when you look at what he was able to do with those red zone targets, he only scored 5 touchdowns. So I think that there was a lot of points still left out there on the field, obviously meaning room for growth for Jake Ferguson here. And he was a tight end 1 in 9 games this season. That's obviously what we want to see out of these young tight ends for us, for our Dynasty Fantasy Football rosters. And I think he should remain as one of the top receiving threats here in Dallas in 2024, and a guy that we can count on as a low-end tight end 1 for our Dynasty Fantasy Football rosters. Now, next up at my tight end 10, it is going to be David Njoku of the Cleveland Browns, and a little bit older than Jake Ferguson, not old by any means, but he is 27 going into his 28-year-old season, and he had a very interesting year in 2023. When you look at the year as a whole, it was really the tale of two halves. He had a slow first half, and he really heated up and caught fire in the second half of our seasons, and honestly, the time that he caught fire was about the time that Deshaun Watson was shut down for the year. But after putting up 81 receptions for 882 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns, being the number 1 tight end in yards after the catch, and the Cleveland Browns going out and adding Jerry Jeudy this offseason, I think there's a couple questions we need to answer. The first question being, was it Joe Flacco who unlocked David Njoku, or was it merely a coincidence? And the second question being, how much will the addition of Jerry Jeudy cap David Njoku's ceiling? You'll have to figure those things out for yourselves. Those are just the questions that I have about David Njoku right now, but I still feel confident enough in him that I have him as my tight end 10 moving forward. Now, sticking in the C tier, coming in as tight end number 9, it is going to be George Kittle of the San Francisco 49ers. Going into his age 31 season, George Kittle has continued to be a beast for our Dynasty Fantasy Football rosters. In 2023, he had 65 receptions for 1,020 receiving yards. He also had 6 touchdowns on top of that. And those 1,000 receiving yards did put him number 1 overall at the tight end position as far as those receiving yards go. And the interesting thing is, even though he was number 1 in receiving yards, he was 10th overall in targets. Now, I do think that this is a crowded offense, and I do think that it makes George Kittle a little bit inconsistent. I mean, he did have the same amount of tight end 1 weeks as Jake Ferguson, and I don't think a lot of people naturally view George Kittle and Jake Ferguson within the same breath, but we have had some rumors of potentially Brandon Ayuk leaving town this offseason. I don't know if that's something that's going to happen, but in the off chance that it does, that could really change the way that we are viewing George Kittle. But for now, he is going to be falling in as my number 9 tight end in Dynasty Fantasy Football. And now coming in at tight end 8, this is still in that C tier. I am going to have Travis Kelce of the Kansas City Chiefs. And dude, we love Travis Kelce over here on this channel, I'll tell you that. But 34 and a half years old, going into his age 35 season, he has been the number 1, the most dominant fantasy football tight end that we probably have ever seen. Now, the 2023 season obviously didn't get off to the best of starts for Travis Kelce. He was injured pretty much week 1, week 2 of the season coming in, but somehow still finished number 1 overall in fantasy points per game in 2023. He averaged 14.6 fantasy points per game. Now, he had 93 receptions for 984 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns. And I think the thing about Travis Kelce is we're not knocking the talent. We know how talented Travis Kelce is. It is the age. Age is becoming concerning with Travis, and he has mentioned retirement more times than once, so it is something that does seem to be on his mind. And I still think Travis Kelce has juice. I mean, if we were talking from a redraft single season lens going into 2024, I think this is a guy who probably should be the number 1 tight end off the board. But the age and the uncertainty of the long-term future of Travis Kelce is why I am bumping him down here into my tight end 8. And also, I do expect Kansas City to keep adding to this receiver room. They're going to keep adding weapons around Travis Kelce because last year they had nothing. We saw Rashee Rice break out. I think he's probably going to be okay to go into the 2024 season, maybe a 2 to 4 game suspension at worst, but it seems like things are going to be okay. They added Hollywood Brown and maybe even a rookie wide receiver in this NFL draft. Obviously, I've already said it, but a game-breaking tight end in Travis Kelce, we still expect that, a Hall of Fame-worthy type of tight end. The long-term questions make him my tight end 8 in my Dynasty rankings. Now, moving on to my B tier, here at my number 7 overall tight end, I am going to have TJ Hockenson, and this hurts my heart, man, because you guys know how much I love my Minnesota Vikings, but we have to be honest. TJ Hockenson, absolute baller, had a great 2023 season, but but there are some question marks and some major red flags around TJ Hockenson right now that are making me bump him down my board. In 2023, he had 95 receptions for 960 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns. He was number 2 overall in fantasy points per game. He was averaging 14.6 fantasy points. But like I said, those red flags, those question marks really stem from a torn ACL and MCL that he suffered in week 16. That's obviously a very bad injury, and we have history here where we've seen it derail guys like Chris Godwin for a long period of time. It's not easy to recover from, and it's probably harder for a tight end to recover from that than it is a wide receiver. So I don't necessarily expect TJ Hockenson to be healthy for probably the majority of the 2024 season. And additionally, Kirk Cousins, we know, has left to go to the Atlanta Falcons, meaning there are going to be long-term question marks about that quarterback position. We all expect them to potentially trade up and go get a rookie quarterback in this year's class, but obviously you have to hit on that rookie quarterback as well. So this is still a very great player. I love TJ Hockenson. I think he's one of the most talented tight ends in the National Football League, but the situation, the injury, the uncertainty around TJ Hockenson right now means that he is way more risky than I want. But with that being said, I do think he is potentially a good buy low candidate for teams that could kind of gamble on TJ Hawkinson's future. Now coming in at my tight end 6, this is where I am going to have Kyle Pitts of the Atlanta Falcons, and seems like he's been in the NFL for so long, but he's 23 years old, younger than Dalton Kincaid at this point. And Kyle Pitts was pretty much deemed the chosen one from the tight end position when he first came into the NFL. He really hasn't lived up to that potential up to this point. And in 2023, he posted a stat line of 53 receptions for 667 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. Now we know that Kyle Pitts, the problem has really just been the bad quarterback play. When I look at what he was able to post in 2023, this is a guy who is number 1 overall in air yards, average depth of target, and air yard share. He also was number 2 overall in average cushion. So he was getting the yardage in the air. He was also getting open. The problem is he wasn't really getting the football. And so I did a little bit of digging, and you look at the target quality rating and the catchable target rate for Kyle Pitts, they were 37th overall in the NFL, and only 64% of his targets were actually deemed catchable. So that is really a rough go for Kyle Pitts last year in 2023. Now we talk about that uncatchable target rate that he was getting. I expect that to get significantly better now that Kirk Cousins is in Atlanta, because he is one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the NFL. And because of that, I know you've heard it before, but I'm going to say it again. I truly do believe that this is the year where if Kyle Pitts were to break out, it's going to happen in 2024, and a guy that I have as my tight end 6 overall. And now the last player in this B tier, it is going to be Mark Andrews of the Baltimore Ravens for me. And 28 years old going into his 29-year-old season, Mark Andrews has been a top 5 tight end in fantasy points per game every year since 2019. Now, he missed 7 games in 2023 because he suffered a cracked fibula on a tackle that actually was used as propaganda to ban that hip drop tackle. And despite missing those 7 games, he still had 45 receptions for 544 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns. Now, Mark had a 22.2% target share with the Ravens, proving to me that he is still the number 1 receiving option for Lamar Jackson in this offense. And on top of that, he also posted a 35.1% dominator rating, which was the best in the NFL amongst all NFL tight ends. And he was also number 1 overall in fantasy points per route run. So it seems like when Mark Andrews is on the field, he is a massive producer for our fantasy football teams and the number 1 receiving target for the Baltimore Ravens. This is a guy who is a difference maker. Yes, he's going to get up there in age as a couple more seasons get tagged onto the belt, but I don't expect the Baltimore Ravens to go out and get a day 1 first round type of wide receiver in this year's class. So I do expect Mark Andrews to be the number 1 receiving option in this offense for at least another year or 2. Now moving on to my A tier, here at the tight end 4 is where we're going to talk about the prodigy, Brock Bowers, baby. You guys love Brock Bowers. I think right now already on KTC, he is the tight end 2 in Dynasty Fantasy Football. I'm pumping the brakes a little bit, but this kid's good, man. Looking at his college career there in Georgia, 175 catches, 2,731 total yards, and 31 touchdowns in 3 seasons. He is a unicorn at the tight end position. People say generational talent. They probably wouldn't be wrong by using that assessment. He is great after the catch. He has great hands. All of these things that we want out of a fantasy relevant tight end. And quite frankly, just one of the best tight end prospects we've probably ever seen coming into the NFL. And this is a guy who received a 99 overall production score from Lance Zierlein. He also had a college dominator rating rating of 27.2%. I expect this guy to be drafted in the first half of the first round, which is very high for tight ends. And I think it's almost guaranteed that he's going to be stepping into an offense where he should become a Dynasty Fantasy Football contributor for your Dynasty Fantasy Football teams right away. Now, coming in as my tight end 3, this is where I'm going to have Dalton Kincaid of the Buffalo Bills. And 24 years old, last year being drafted in the first round of the 2023 draft to the Buffalo Bills. He had 73 receptions for 673 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, we know the big news about Buffalo this year is that Stephon Diggs was traded to the Houston Texans. Gabe Davis has left in free agency to go to the Jacksonville Jaguars. And what this has done is this has opened up 211 targets in this offense, which was a total of 44.4% of their entire passing offense in 2023. And those targets are going to be up for the taking here going into the 2024 season. Now, this is exactly what you want out of your tight ends for fantasy football. I usually target guys who can be the number 1 or the number 2 receiving option in their own offense at worst. And last year, it seems like that's what the Buffalo Bills had drafted Dalton Kincaid to become, the number 2 receiving option next to Stephon Diggs. And now Stephon Diggs isn't there. Dalton Kincaid is going to need to act like a number 1 wide receiver in this offense right away at the tight end position. And remember, I said this is a guy who had 2 touchdowns in 2023, so there's definitely some positive touchdown regression on the horizon for Dalton Kincaid. And I think this is the type of talent at the tight end position, a guy in Dalton Kincaid who I think can actually contend for the tight end 1 in fantasy football during the 2024 season. Now, still sticking in this A tier, coming in at my tight end 2, it is going to be Trey McBride of the Arizona Cardinals. And Trey McBride is 24 years old, came into year 2 of his NFL career, and he broke out in the back half of the season. And that was about the time that Kyler Murray came back from injury. So they built rapport right away, and Kyler Murray and Trey McBride, they took off for fantasy football purposes. And speaking of that back half of the year, Trey McBride was a tight end 1 in 9 out of his last 12 games down that stretch. He also was a top 3 tight end at the position in 4 of those 9 games. So he balled out to close out the season. That is no surprise. 81 receptions for 825 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. This is a player who had the highest target rate of all tight ends in the NFL, 26.1%. He was number 2 overall in yards per route run, and he was also top 5 in both target separation and average cushion. So just a guy who wins downfield in his routes, gets the football, does a lot with the football in his hands, and he was dominant for your fantasy football teams. Now, I know that the rumor is that we all expect the Arizona Cardinals to potentially be a team that is going to be drafting Marvin Harrison Jr. or maybe even Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, one of these guys in the NFL draft. They can do that, and Trey McBride is still going to be a big part of this offense. Obviously, we know Hollywood Brown has left in free agency, and I mentioned it earlier, you want guys who can be the number 1 or the number 2. No matter who they bring in, McBride will be at worst the number 2 in this offense, and there definitely is room for some positive touchdown regression in here as well. This is a guy who could score more than he did in 2023 and still be a top tier tight end for our Dynasty Fantasy Football teams, and that's why he's my tight end 2 overall. And now moving on to my S tier, there's one guy. You guys probably know who he is. It is Sam LaPorta, 23 years old, being drafted to the Detroit Lions. Sam LaPorta had the best rookie tight end season that we have ever seen from any tight end ever in the history of the NFL. He was that damn good. 86 receptions for 889 receiving yards and 10 touchdowns from LaPorta as a rookie. He averaged 14.1 fantasy points per game and finished as the tight end 1 in fantasy football again as a rookie. Now, scary enough, I actually look at what he was able to put together statistically from an analytical profile in year 1, and there's probably room for improvement here for Sam LaPorta too. LaPorta saw a 79.2% catchable target rate, which was 19th amongst tight ends in the NFL. So there's room there for Jared Goff to improve. Obviously, 19th is pretty middle of the pack for the NFL, actually leaning a little bit more towards the bottom third. And I also think that he can improve a lot here as a route runner and as a separator. He ranked 21st in target separation and 17th in average cushion. So if he works on that, gets a little bit better at that, this is a guy who's going to get open even more often than he was already in 2023. I think the big elephant in the room and why some people are probably going to tell you that Sam LaPorta is overvalued is because of the 10 touchdowns. And although 10 touchdowns is probably going to be hard to replicate for Sam LaPorta, I still think we're looking at a player who could contend for the tight end 1 spot for the next decade, similar to how we have seen Travis Kelce do it since 2014. And this is a guy who I think is the tight end one in Dynasty Fantasy Football and an actual game breaker for the tight end position, especially if you're playing in leagues that have tight end premiums. Now, that is all I have for you guys today. If you did enjoy the video, go ahead and hit that like button. It is the best free way to show this channel some support. Also, make sure you guys are subscribed. We have a goal here where we want to get to 1,500 subscribers by the NFL draft. We are getting very close. We're doing a good job at that goal. So if you're new here, you like this type of content, hit that subscribe button and we'll see you on some future videos. And last but not least, make sure you guys are joining our Discord. I have a Discord linked in the description. It is free for now, but it's not going to be free for much longer. So if you want to get in there while it's free, go join that Discord linked in the description. We help with trades, waivers. You guys can help in future videos like trade shows, mock drafts, all that good stuff. So make sure you go join that Discord. It is free, like I said, so there is no risk in doing that. So with all of that being said, I will see you guys on the next video. But until then, peace out.